Good afternoon. Welcome to ORF. It's a very fine weather in Delhi. It's a lovely rainy day today. And some of our guests are joining from other parts of the world where it might be a little too early for them. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming here. And of course, our panelists for joining. We are here to discuss today India and Africa, redefining ties for a new world order. Africa, which is home to about 18% of the world population, and India, the most populous country of the world, together they constitute the bulk of the global population. And we are here to discuss how India and Africa can together play a more influential role in the new world order. Multilateralism, as we know, is in an unprecedented crisis, and multilateral institutions are not being able to tackle the complex problems that the world is facing today. So we are here to discuss how India and Africa can play a much more important role in global governance. And we have a very eminent panel today with us. Let me introduce them to you. Annele Simon. She serves as the Acting Secretary General of the Independent Continental Youth Advisory Council on AFCFTA. She's also a legal researcher focusing on international intellectual property law, AFCFTA implementation, and the crucial role of youth in shaping the African continent's economic future. Thank you so much for joining us, Annele. Then we have Kwame Ovino. Kwame is the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Economic Affairs. This is a public policy think tank in Kenya. He undertakes research in key policy areas on public expenditure, revenue, trade, economic regulation, etc. Thank you so much for joining us, Kwame. We also have with us Modesta Nusova Adu. She is a lawyer with Ghana's central bank and a gender mainstreaming, diversity and inclusion consultant with the World Trade Institute's gender research team in Bern. Thank you so much, Modesta, for joining us. And our very own Samir Bhattacharya, who is a scholar at ORF. He works in geopolitics with particular focus on Africa and its role in changing the global order. He's also pursuing his PhD on African studies from a prominent university, Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. So I am going to start now, and how I propose to organize this is that I would each speaker would have about 10 to 12 minutes to make their presentation first, and then I'll open it up for the question and answer session. Can we have the questions, the driving questions? So these are the driving questions that our team has prepared. These questions will help to direct us while we talk about India and Africa's role in the New World Order. I'm going to read out the questions quickly. Why Africa needs a stronger voice in multilateral organizations? What role can Africa play in the emerging world order? How can Africa benefit from its participation in various multilateral organizations, including the G20? What is the future of India-Africa collaboration in this changing global order? What reforms are required in multilateral institutions to suit present-day needs? How can the international financial architecture serve the interests of the global South better? How can India and Africa collaborate towards the new multilateralism that we want to talk about? And how can India and Africa navigate the geopolitical rivalries together? So we have a lot of ground to cover today. And I'm going to first call upon our speaker, Annele Simon. She is, as I've mentioned, an expert on bringing the youth into the economic affairs. So I would request you, Annele, to share your perspective with us. You have 10 to 12 minutes.
Firstly, thank you very much for having me, and fellow panelists. It's very nice to meet you both and everybody else. I I work with youth, but my background is international trade and investment law. I probably won't take up the full 10 minutes because I would like us to be more interactive. But when it comes firstly to Africa's participation in multilateralism, when you have a bird's eye view of everything, it does look like, well, Africa is a part of many bilateral trade agreements. We've been part of the WTO for a very long time. Even within Africa, we have our own regional economic blocs, which are also trading sort of blocs. But when you actually really zoom in to see just how much power per se, or how much influence that Africans have, or our governments have in the global sphere, historically, it really has not been that much. Now, my background, I think, is similar to Modesta's as well, is in international trade law. So, for example, you'll see that the WTO has a very, very good dispute settlement system where countries who are part of that, the trade organization, can bring disputes, and they regularly do. And it's not only reserved for developed countries. Developing countries such as India and Brazil participate very much so. So a lot of the coursework and casework that you'll see will always be India brings cases regularly, Brazil brings cases regularly. So this is not just reserved for developed countries. But in the case of Africa, and all of the countries that are African that have actually been there to say, hey, we are part of the WTO, we have an equal say. When we're not happy, and we can bring a case, we can bring a dispute. It has, my apologies, I think it's only happened only once, where Africa's actually been able to voice their unhappiness or displeasure. So a lot of the time we've taken so much of a back seat. Now that more trade is happening, we have the first time ever, we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a trade agreement that will work similarly. The easiest way to explain it will work similarly to the EU agreement, but only for the movement of goods. So trying to be sort of like a customs union within Africa. And we've seen that even in our regional agreements, yes, there's a lot of trade. SACU in Southern Africa is the oldest customs union. So Africans do trade. But when it comes to now trading more globally and having a voice and trading more confidently with that voice and bringing disputes and things like that, not so much. South Africa is also a part of BRICS, which includes, of course, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So we are looking more to being stronger in our trade. Of course, there's the intersection of politics and how much can be said and how much can be done. My keen interest is in how much of the youth, Africa's youth, is aware of their power in trade, how much of Africa's youth is aware of multilateral trade. Our youth is really mostly aware with trading informally within our countries and sometimes within, across the borders, but not so much trading globally, which is the work that we are working on at Ukayaka. So there's a lot of growth. There's a lot of history to learn from, but when it comes to youth and being involved especially, there's a lot that we need in terms of education. Africa having a stronger voice, I don't think should be a threat to any country or any trading agreement anywhere. Having representation and fairness should not be viewed as trying to grab too much of the pie. Africa has a very young population. The youth is our biggest demographic. So for us, it's really, really important that our diverse perspectives are heard and that we're included in global decision-making as well. So for now, I'll stop there and join in with someone else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anele. You raised some very important points with regard to Africa being able to voice its concerns in international organizations and the importance of being able to effectively bring its own disputes in organizations like the WTO. Now I'd like to turn to Kwame. Kwame, you would have done a lot of work on trade and global economic issues and also global financial architecture. So please share your perspective with us.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. And My apologies. My office is just not suitable for this kind of meeting, but I hope you can hear me. So I'll answer only 3 questions in the 10 minutes that I have. I think it's more than enough. So I'll take the question about why Africa needs a stronger voice before I go down to what the rest of this question is. I think it's self-evident why Africa needs a stronger voice. And part of that is obviously that we live in a world in which states matter for not just to create stability and governance, but also it's part of the fact that at the global level, the diversity of voices is required now more than ever, because for a very long time there's been this hegemonic control, if I may say, or to diversify to diversify the knowledge sources through which the world can tap. I think it's important for Africa to have a stronger voice. So that's the first. And the second point is just basically that, look, I am not totally persuaded, as there are people who say that the world is splitting into geopolitical spheres. I'm not too sure about that, sitting here where I do in Africa. But even if that was the case, I think that there are global public goods. And I think that's where the voice of Africa would come in. Global public goods are things that are related to global safety, global security, global control of crisis that have more transnational character. COVID was one of them. So the provision of global public goods such as global trade routes, the sea, safety, airline safety, and all those require some level of, I hesitate to use the word coordination, but basically coordination that requires similar rules and enforcement. And the third one is just basically dispute resolution of a global character. So therefore, to have institutions at the global level with credibility and that matter is essential. And then the final one is just basically that, as my colleagues have mentioned, and I think was mentioned in part of the concept, that Africa or African people, and by African people, I need to be clear here. I do not necessarily mean people with black skins, but I mean people who live on the African continent are going to have to constitute a greater share of global populations, because the demographic transition is happening on the African continent, but they're going to constitute a larger share. For that reason, those voices will need to be, so tapping into Africa's resources, intellectual resources for the purposes of the first 3 questions that I mentioned is going to be an imperative. It'll be self-evident and it'll happen regardless. So our preparedness is essential. So that's the first part. And the second question I'll say here that is important for the next 2 points that I'll answer is, look, it is not true that the word Africa is a construct, but it is not true that there's an African voice or an African perspective on anything. And that doesn't mean, for instance, that the Africans have a homogeneous view about how global public goods should be provided, for instance. That's even going to become more evident, because I think African countries are taking different trajectories now, and that is essential for the next part that I'll say. So for instance, at the Institute of Economic Affairs, we classify African countries, generally African countries, if you look at it as economists classify African countries in many ways. So you could classify it spatially as small. Africa is some of the largest countries by land size, and then very small island states. Or you can classify by resource endowed, and others such as Kenya that do not have a lot of natural resources. And you could also classify them on a democratic spectrum as countries that are struggling to build nascent democracies such as Kenya, and others that are failed states even, I have to be honest, failed states. So you're dealing with a very complex structure or tapestry of countries. So anybody who's talking of Africa as a homogeneous person needs to be careful about what you say African voice or African opinion or African values would be. It is not one thing. And having said that, so let's talk about reforms in the multilateral institutions. I think African countries, so you all know the World Bank classification of countries by income level. So there's low, least developed countries, lower middle income, and high income countries. Least developed countries, I think there are 28 of them, of which 25 are African. So it's mostly an African question. So I say, therefore, that global economic development in the next phase of human development are going to be largely about the development of these African countries, because half of African countries fall in the least development structure. So countries or institutions, World Bank, WTO, the IMF, the United Nations that deal with global affairs, in the structure of economic and welfare development, they're going to have to be interfacing and speaking mostly about things that have effects on Africa very directly. So for that reason, those voices, perspectives of Africans, including the representation of African people, again, when I say African people, I don't mean black-skinned people, I mean people who reside on the African continent, are going to have to be shown in those institutions, or they will lack credibility. So that's the first one. The second is, if you look at international financial architecture, right now, there's been, over the last 20 years or so, a burst of debts, where the structure of global debt architecture has changed in the sense that African countries, including Kenya, resorted towards going towards commercial debts globally. And that is generating a debt crisis. Now, that brings in the IMF as a central feature of resolving those questions. So Kenya has had an IMF program going for 2.5, 3 years now, 3 years actually. And so the reflection of voices, perspectives, and a realization of what kind of economies and their vulnerabilities on the African continent or specific African countries is going to be essential. So that's so the structuring or the change in the architecture of these countries, of these institutions, IMF specifically, the World Bank, are going to have to reflect that, the WTO as well. The third point, which I think is more technical but also essential, is, look, many countries, not just African countries, but African countries predominantly, are also suffering from debt distress, especially in the last 4 years. 3 African countries that were growing very fast have experienced debt shocks and actually had defaults. So I'm speaking here of Zambia, Ghana, and Ethiopia. They were growing very fast, but they experienced debt defaults. And that's fine. But we are clear that globally, there's no absolute global rules for restructuring sovereign debt defaults. What we have is a common framework, and that common framework does not work efficiently, or at least as efficiently, and people are dissatisfied. So for that reason, part of that global architectural, financial architectural reform would actually be leading, and African voices and South Asian voices have to lead in the formation of a global mechanism for resolving corporate insolvency. Resolving sovereign insolvency. And here the IMF and all those other institutions would have come, but the design of an institution that provides clear rules and mechanisms for resolving them is necessary, because if that doesn't happen, we're going to have a complication such as what we have today, which is putting countries in completely different so you're treating the same things differently in different countries and all that. And we know it. I mean, since some of you come from South Asia, you understand what's happened to Sri Lanka. We all understand the mess in Zambia. It's just being resolved after 3 years. Ghana and Ethiopia, all of them are very different rules. And therefore, dealing with global lenders, especially those from the commercial arm, and new lenders, especially those that come from your neighbors in the south, I mean, in the west, in the east of India, for instance, is essential to provide rules, because a rule-based system is important. And I'm arguing that global solvency reform, sovereign solvency reform, is a global public good. So that's one. So how does it serve the global south? Now, the global south, I'm not too sure again that the word global south means a lot. It's a very politically potent word, but I'm not too sure that it means a lot, because global south countries are as different. Again, homogeneity, but we might have certain interests that are common. And one of the interests that global south countries have, especially because global commercial lenders financial markets tend to be based in what we call the West, or in more high-income countries. So global borrowing countries such as Kenya and others have an interest in the formation of a borrowers club, because there's the Paris Club, which is lenders, and they have a lot of voice, and they have a very coordinated approach to this. I think forming one and allowing for a facility such as that to develop is essential. And then finally, I'm an incorrigible multilateralist. And I'm very concerned that many African countries and other countries in the world are being cynical about the WTO and its space in expanding global multilateral trade, just as a time when African people are getting to be managers and leaders of these institutions. So my view is that there's a tapestry of bilateral rules or bilateral arrangements that many countries, including African countries on their own, are pursuing. And the problem with this is that it forms a very complicated trade policy globally. And in my view, reinforcing the WTO by strengthening the dispute resolution mechanism and to get trade rounds back going and clarifying the role of members is something that I think needs to happen. Why? Because the WTO stands out singularly as an institution that gives power through the single undertaking rule, but also the idea that all countries can actually have an equal vote, an essential one. So stating those, I think it's a purely simple and sensible case for why India and African countries individually or in a corporate level, or together, can work together to strengthen the global financial architecture, but also the provision of public goods. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. You've made many important points. Firstly, of course, yes, we need diversity in global institutions. I love the way you put across that point so strongly. And you also raise a cautionary note with regard to how Africa is not a monolith and it is not at all homogeneous. So we need to be careful about what we mean when we say African voices. And very important points with regard to the debt crisis and the need to reform the global financial architecture and have rules for sovereign insolvency. Thank you so much. I would next turn to Modesta. Modesta, please share your perspective with us.
Thank you, and good morning from Accra. I think my colleagues or my co-panelists have already shared quite insightful perspectives, some of which I had already noted down. So I will just make my discussion quite brief. One of the key things I want to talk about in answering the question why Africa needs a strong voice in multilateral organizations is first and foremost on representation and fairness. So just like the moderator rightly said, I think Anneli has also spoken about it. When you take the African continent as a whole, it is home to about 54 countries. This makes it the largest continent by number of countries. It is also home to about 1.3 billion people. And so it's a very populous continent, just like India is a very populous nation. But in spite of this, African nations often find themselves underrepresented in most of our global decision-making bodies, such as the UN Security Council. And I think if we are to have a multipolar world where inclusivity and issues of diversity are properly addressed, then there should be fair representation for the African continent or African nations at the multilateral level. Another issue that borders on this is addressing an opportunity to address specific challenges. Just like Kwame rightly said, when we talk about Africa, in this context, we are referring to people that live on the African continent, not just Blacks. Because if you pick us holistically, just in reference as Blacks, you can find a number of Black people or people of color all over the world. But when you take, in this instance, referring specifically to people living on the African continent, there are a number of key challenges that are very peculiar to the African continent, issues such as peace and security. And so if Africans have a fair representation, a fair voice, a stronger voice at the international level, then some of these peculiar challenges that are bedeviled on the African continent can be properly addressed instead of just making and trade, we used to call it probably something like the lasagna solution. So you have so many things put together trying to address different things, but in reality, the specific needs or specific issues are not properly spoken about or properly addressed, because sometimes you have solutions that do not address specific issues as how it should, the way they ought to be addressed. And so it is one of the reasons why Africa and Africa as a continent needs a stronger voice at the international level. The other thing I would like to speak about, if you take African nations like DR Congo, Sudan, Mali, Ethiopia, and the Cameroon, these are countries that have been affected time and time again by issues of conflict, security issues, and external interventions. And so a stronger voice in multilateral organizations such as probably the UN Security Council will actually help the continent address these challenges more effectively and through international cooperation and support, African coming together through peacekeeping missions, and then lending a voice on some of the root causes of some of these issues of peace and security on the continent, how they can be tackled hands-on and not just based on what others or like the policies and initiatives that people that do not actually experience it think could be the solution. But for those on the ground, what actually the situation is and how best these policies that are tailored can actually address the situation. Another important issue that calls for a stronger voice for the African continent is the issue of climate change and sustainability. There's a number of research that speaks to the fact that the African continent, even though it is one of the least emitters for global emission, it is one of the continents, if not the most highly affected by the adverse effects of climate change. And so Africa is disproportionately affected by climate change, despite us being the least contributors to global emission. So in that light, a stronger voice in multilateral environmental organizations can actually ensure that the continent's needs are prioritized. They are considered in global climate policies and actions. Thank you.
So much, Modesta. You've brought the point about climate change and sustainability, a very important area, particularly for Africa, which, as you've mentioned, has been not at all a contributor to global greenhouse emissions, but is suffering some of the worst impacts of climate change. You also talk about the need for representation and fairness in global institutions and a greater voice enabling African countries to deal with various peculiar problems, as you label them. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective. In the end, I would like to turn to Samir. Samir, would you also like to cover a little bit about India and Africa?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to see all of you here. So it's good to be last in the panel, so I can cover the questions which were missed by my co-panelists. So basically, since we are talking about India, Africa, and how we are redefining the new global order. So first, let me explain a little bit what is this new global order. So we are sitting in 2024. If we go back 100 years, 1924, there are 2/3 of the humanity where the countries were colonized. Then came the World War. After the World War, we saw this unipolar world where US was it came the bipolar world where US and Soviet Union were the two leading poles. Then came after the collapse of Soviet Union, we had this unipolar world where USA started dominating. Now we are in the stage of probably a fourth transition where we don't know whether this world is unipolar world, whether this world is a bipolar world or multipolar world. Everybody is so, if we think this is some people are saying it's still a unipolar world, of course, with a waning US influence, because if we look that US defense budget, it's still, surpasses more than the next 5 countries. Then some people are saying, no, the USA and China, these 2 countries are covering 42% of the global trade. So it must be a bipolar world. But if we go deep into it, are these two countries actually controlling the world? They are, in that case, the world should be divided in two poles, with like it happened during the Cold War. But it's not happening. So it's a multipolar world, and some people are actually calling it as a multiplex world. It's like where complex interdependence, like in a multiplex where you have lot of choices, lot of movies are going on. So basically, this world order is, one thing is for sure, this world order is in a flux. We don't know who is actually powerful and who is seeking what. Everybody with their vested interest. Now coming to India and Africa. So first, let us start with India. What India did during the previous era. So during the first Cold War, India took this non-alignment approach. India was neither allied with US nor with Soviet Union, and it worked very well for India. And all African countries, in fact, today also this non-alignment movement is still alive. Apart from South Sudan, all the African countries are part of non-alignment movement. But this organization is also lost its relevance, because the members itself, they don't give it too much importance. And then the other institutions, institutions created by the West, like Bretton Woods institutions, they are also losing their relevance because they are quite anachronistic, they are quite unrepresentative. They don't reflect the current reality. So in this situation, and also there is a very huge difference between the Cold War and the current Cold War 2.0, as some people are calling it, where in US and China, or US versus China-Russia axis. So in the first Cold War, India had, I'm talking first India's position. So during the first Cold War, India's had it was not hostile relationship either with US or with Soviet Union. We had a very good equal distance with both the countries, both the superpowers. But now, if we look at current day, it is India will be very much tempted to the whatever is if we call it a bipolar world, US versus China, the thing that going on around the world, especially with China, like what happened in Galwan Valley, what happened in the way China is pressuring us. So India will be very much tempted to join US against China. But then, so if we look at from that angle, India and US, they are together when it comes to China. But again, then comes the other pole, which is Russia. When it comes to Russia, India is very much close to, still maintains very good relationship with Russia. So in that case, India will not be with USA when it comes to opposing Russia. And then there is another difference. The first Cold War was very much centered around influencing Europe. But if we look at this, if it is at all a Cold War, it is the battle of influence for Asia, battle of influence for Africa, particularly Africa's resources. So it's a resource-rich continent. 65% of the world's arable land is uncultivated arable land is found in Africa. So no wonder every power, whether it's traditional or non-traditional or emerging, they are eyeing Africa. So in this situation, when these global institutions are not working, what is happening? UN, even UN, it's we saw that during this Russia-Ukraine crisis, how it divided the world, how UN's influence is waning. So there is a rise of a lot of you can call it plurilateralism, or you can call it minilateralism. This is some organizations, smaller organizations, which are based mostly issue based. So it can be security based, like it can be Quad, or it can be technology based, like RCEP, or small on trade basis. So in this flux, what India and Africa can do together is, if UN General Secretary, UN General Assembly is taking all the decisions, all the 5 countries, it's only 5 countries are member of it. And 70% of the issues treated in UNGA is concerning Africa. And there is not a single representative of Africa there. So do you really, is it really representative? And they are also refusing to change the order. So in that case, what should we do? The first thing, in this plurilateralism, we saw last year, African Union become member of G20. That was something remarkable. Now, now G20 is probably, after UN, it is the most representative organization, not only population-wise, but also economy-wise. Then, but then going forward, I think this African Union, it is still an institution which is still lacks capacity compared to other union like European Union. It does not have, for example, G20. If we take the G20 itself, G20 has a very important angle of Sherpa meeting. So this Sherpa, African Union doesn't even have a Sherpa. This so how African Union is going to participate in these meetings? How Africa will have a more voice the way we desire? This is the question, and I think being experienced the similar with this similar type of experience, I think India and Africa, we are poised to collaborate more in different ways, in different, not only in organizations like G20, BRICS, or IBSA, but we can also collaborate in, India has a very good bilateral relationship with most of the African countries, almost all the African countries. We have this India-Africa Forum Summit, which is the last time it happened, it was quite long, 2015, I think we should have another India-Africa Forum Summit very soon. I expect it is going to be very soon. Also, one more important thing, I feel that there should be some representative offices of African Union in India, so that we have more direct conversation with African Union, and we can work together towards building, towards helping each other, and towards contributing more in the G20 or other similar forums. I think I will end here and I'll take more questions.
Samir, now we have quite some time. The speakers have been very disciplined, and I would open it up. But before that, I think Anele wants to make a short intervention. Please go ahead, Anele.
Yes, I believe I still have at least a couple of minutes of my time. I wanted to also just emphasize what Kwame said and what Modesta also helped to further emphasize, that when we're talking about Africa, we're not talking about Black people. And I remember not long ago, I also found out that the biggest population of Indians living outside of India is actually in South Africa, where I am right now. And if you go to East Africa too, you'll find that that culture, the African culture, is fully merged. And these cultural mergings are part of what makes trade work sometimes, what makes multilateralism work, what makes people work together, because there's an understanding there. A lot of things that we don't know that comes from ignorance is because we don't merge with each other. But when we are talking about Africa, we are talking about absolutely everybody who lives here and everybody who aspires to live here, because there's a lot of growth. Africa is one of the least saturated in terms of development, and that's how we should always be looking at it and thinking forward about it. I just wanted to raise that point. Thank you, moderator.
So much for sharing the important links between India and Africa. Of course, we have a huge Indian population in Africa, and the ties are very deep. So now let me just open it up, and I'd first like to request the ambassador from Gambia to make his intervention before we just go around the room.
I must first of all express my appreciation to the panel, especially those in the continent in Africa, and the panelists who are right here. This topic or the topics are quite important. If we look at the issues that the panelists have already raised, it basically touched on all aspects of the relationship, which are not only Africa and India, but also Africa and other parts of the world. But in this discussion, we pay special emphasis on the relationship between Africa and India. It is these two, joined at the West. You know, we share a lot of things in common, and India as a leader of the global South. This is displayed last year during the G20, that Africa has become a member of the G20. But moving forward, the two of us, Africa and India, we should take advantage of this newfound opportunity. What do we do with this relationship with the G20, Africa being a member? We should not just stop at a lip service. We should do something about it. For example, if you look at the current India's budget, you have the allocation between India and Africa in terms of US dollars is equivalent to that of India and Sri Lanka. That is quite interesting. Africa is a continent, 55 countries, and the budget allocation is equal to Sri Lanka. And I think another country, it is perplexing. I think we should be talking in terms of billions between Africa and India. For example, Gambia, India is the third largest trading partner of the Gambia. We rely on India in a lot of things. We have a very strong bilateral relationship, and we should support each other. Mr. Samir also mentioned the fact that AU should have a representation in India. I think this should have been done quite a long time. Without AU in India, we cannot do anything. The AU side would be paying lip service, and India, I think, need also to look at this very carefully, so that we can work together to accomplish something for all of us. In terms of representation at the UN Security Council, I think sometimes, even if you look at the arguments that come from Africa, we always look at the interest of India. India is a big, country. The population higher than Africa. India should be represented in the Security Council. But at the same time, Africa also should be represented in the Security Council. I think these are all facts. Therefore, India and Africa, we have a shared objective that all of us should work to achieve. And if we do that, there will be no lip service. Because if you look at the UN, if India engages with the United States, they would say we have no objection. We want India to be part of the Security Council. And they go to France, they will also say India should be part of the Security Council. But what else? That's where they stop. they have the influence. They can switch. They can do it, but they are not doing it. So now the time for lip service should be over. We should look at more progressive things that are good for all of us. My understanding is that in November, early November, we'll have India-Africa Forum Summit. And I think this would be opportunity to look into all of these areas: trade, technology, space, artificial intelligence, and so many things, agriculture. The entire UN, IMF, World Bank, financial systems, I think all these areas should be looked into. For example, now, if Gambia wants, what's it called, LOC from the government of India, we have to comply with the IMF and World Bank regulations. This is a bilateral relationship. We want a facility from India, but we are conditioned to comply with IMF and World Bank regulations. What can India do about this? They can do something about this. If, for example, IMF regulation is 1.5% interest, why not India give a 1% interest? If the grace period is 5 years, why can't India increase it to 10 years, 6 years? If the loan payment period is 25 years, why can't India make it 30 years? Give more terms to this agreement. I think that this would entice Africa to take more LOC loans from India. And also India can look into shortening the period of accessing these loans. Gambia, we are grateful to India, the symbol of our democracy, that is our National Assembly, was built through LOC facility from the Indian government. Electricity, water systems, all of this from the government of India. So our relationship with your government, the Indian government, is excellent. And we want to expand that. So the entire continent, African continent, even though one of the panelists mentioned that we should not look into Africa as a homogeneous whole, that's diverse individualism. But I think the issue that affects Gambia affects Ethiopia, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya. So we should look at these issues as a whole, not by individual countries. For example, when you talk about India, when India is taking up issues that affects India, India is not looking at different states. India also has more than 28, 29 states. They are not looking at the interest of all the states individually. They are looking at the interest of India as a whole. Africa also should look at the interest of a continent as a whole, not as individual countries. If we do that, we remain where we are, and we have to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. You've made some very important interventions, particularly about the need for Africa to fight for its interest as a united whole, and the need for India to step up its engagement and step up its lines of credit, step up its grants to Africa, and more close participation between the AU and India. Thank you so much. I think I'll request Modesta to make a short intervention before I just open it up for the audience here.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I think my intervention was on the collaboration between India and Africa, but I believe His Excellency has excellently touched on a number of my points. So, but I also go on and stress on areas such as the joint advocacies for institutional reform, and then promoting agenda of the global south, where Africa and India can utilize common platforms, just like His Excellency and Sami Riley said, the India-African Summit, to coordinate positions and strategies on global issues. And this will ensure that the voice of both India and Africa, or to put it together, the global south, is united and then stronger at the multilateral level. Another area worthy of collaboration, I think His Excellency also mentioned, and then Sami also, is on economic trade and cooperation. And so, just like Sami Riley said, India has a number of bilateral trade agreements with a number of African countries. And so on that tangent, we can negotiate further trade agreements, or ensure that the existing trade agreements are actually rightly implemented. So put in place policies that reduce trade barriers and enhance economic cooperation between Indian and African countries to foster much more economic growth and development. Another area, and this is where the African Continental Free Trade Area comes into light, is the provision of technical assistance and capacity building. In this vein, when India and then Africa can come up with initiatives or that provide technical assistance and capacity building programs in areas such as information technology, agriculture, healthcare, and other areas. We know that the Indian pharmaceutical sector is one of, it's much more advanced and developed. I think at least it could be compete with the global pharmaceutical, most of the global pharmaceutical sectors. And so in such light, if we could actually come up with initiatives that provide assistance to other African countries or pharmaceutical industries within Africa, that could actually help in building much more collaboration and then economic development among the continent and then India. And so, and similar to that, we could also look at leveraging regional economic organizations, such as the African Union and the South Asian Association for Regional Collaboration. Such organizations could facilitate greater cooperation with our regional organizations, and then they address areas of common regional challenges and promote development. I think His Excellency rightly touched on some of these areas. So we could look at the agricultural sector, technology. I know even here in Ghana, there are a number of the good information technology companies in Ghana, like NNIT, the IPMC, that have been very instrumental in the development of ICT and information technology. We could still leverage in such areas of cooperation and then collaboration to provide support for our regional integration. Such efforts could actually help create a larger, more unified market that will attract investment and then drive growth among Indians and then Africans at large. So thank you.
Desta, for bringing up the very important issue of capacity building, and you gave us a whole list of areas where India and Africa can partner. Now, I would like to open up the discussion and involve our audience. We also have people sitting at the back. So where do we start from? We start from the back this time.
Ma'am, my name is Madhusudhan and I'm currently law student I'm studying in National Forensic Sciences University, Delhi campus, ma'am. So as it was highlighted during the meeting that South Africa possesses a very rich amount of natural resources. And so recently, in the recent past, cybersecurity threats had poses the potential significant risk. And for example, in 2019 only, there was a ransomware attack on the Johannesburg grid, due to which South Africa suffered significant amount of risk. So, how India and Africa can work together in this regard to develop the efficient energy grid system and to tackle this cyber issue? And what are the expectations of Africa from India and other multilateral organizations in this regard?
Great, thank you. So you're talking about energy security, cyber security, and how India and Africa can collaborate. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Abhishek, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Abhishek Mishra from IDS. Two questions. First to Anil. Recently, 14 countries from EAC, SADC, and COMESA, they have come together and signed a tripartite free trade area agreement. So, in your view, will the TFTA be an opportunity? Will it create opportunities, or will it create hurdles or challenges for the AFCFTA in terms of overlap, in terms of mandate? Second question is to Kwame. Around 22 African countries, they don't have any credit rating systems. And the African Union, I mean, recently under the APRM mechanism and all, they are working towards African Union's own credit rating system, I guess to be by next year, which will be released by next year. So how do you think, how important will the African Union's own credit rating agency be in terms of, like, in terms of transparency and also in terms of creating a uniform level field, apart from, in terms of getting another opinion, if I may say a fourth opinion apart from the big three? Thank you.
Good afternoon all. My name is Harikesh Mena and I am currently preparing for UPSC IS. So my question is to Ambassador of Gambia, that you talked about the line of credit from India to African countries, but we have been seeing, or we have been witnessing since 1 decade or last decade, that China checkbook diplomacy is giving a lot of credits to the African countries, and that is leading to the debts, or that is unsustainable debts for the African countries. So how India's line of credit will fit into that China's checkbook diplomacy, or is China giving any of the street for the India's line of credit as far as the African countries are concerned? Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Meghna and I'm currently pursuing my PhD from Center for African Studies, JNU. So my question is that we heard during the discussion that climate change is one of the major factors due to which a lot of conflicts are happening in Africa. It is maybe not the main driver, but significant player. So how do you think India and Africa can come together on addressing this issue of climate change, which is a major challenge right now?
Good afternoon. Myself Tanishq Mohan from University of Delhi, and my question, either of any delegate can take it. Considering the fact that Africa itself is now can be seen is visibly geopolitically divided. Western Africa recently saw intervention from Russia, especially country Burkina Faso. Eastern Africa is looking towards China, for example, Somalia. Eastern Africa has been occupied by China, more or less. Western Africa got influenced by Russia, while Southern Africa recently saw a political turmoil where parliament was set up on fire. So do you think that that Africa is now a modern platform for global power play? And the question is open to all the 4 delegates. Thank you.
I am Pankaj Kumar Sharma, pursuing master degree in Russian language from Jawaharlal Nehru University. My question is to an alumni that is there any plan between Africa and India to enhance mutual understanding of language and culture studies? Because there are not much universities in India to study African language or any culture studies. Only 3 universities, Allahabad University, Banaras Hindu University, and in JNU, only 1 center for African studies. Any plan for?
Excellency, we have been talking for a long time about India to be a Security Council with veto power. And China is a big issue with veto power not allowing to India. So can we make something so that China is unable to use this veto power to stop India to be or Africa can be also a representation in UN Security Council? How we can deal this problem?
Thank you, sir. So we'll take the same format that we had. we'll start with Anele, then Kwame, then Modesta, then Samir, and then we'll end with Ambassador. Let's start, Anele. Please keep your interventions a little short. We do not have much time, and we'd want to cover everything. So go ahead, Anele.
Okay, so looking at the time, I think I will answer firstly the question that was addressed directly to me. Modesta, when she was making her submissions, she did speak about the spaghetti bowl effect of having so many trade agreements. We've seen it also at WTO. You have a global trade agreement, and then the countries have bilaterals, and in those bilaterals, there's others. The same happens in Africa. However, in the AFCFTA agreement, which is the continental agreement that we are now implementing, it does recognize the existing regional trade agreements, because we don't want to dismantle those while we are still busy implementing the global one. So at all times, the regional trade agreements, such as the tripartite agreement or the East Africa agreement and so forth, and the ECOWAS agreements, those ones are what we are using as our best practice learning experiences, because you have to always keep in mind that the AFCFTA is limited, that this agreement is only for the free movement of goods and services. But some of the regional agreements are the free movement of goods and services. They also some have like a monetary policy within them. There's also the free movement of people. For example, in the EAC, the East Africa Regional Agreements, they have the same passports and you can travel. However, this agreement, the AFCFTA, plays a different role because it's trying to integrate, but for now it's limited to only the goods and services. So all the others remain, the regional agreements, but they are the building blocks. So we are looking to them for the learning. And then the last question I also wanted to address was with regards to geopolitical divisions and whether Africa is the modern playground for global power play. I think when you find that Africans and African governments now have more of a voice and more confidently using that voice, it's only normal that there will be more influence from different countries. I do not think that we have a situation of modern colonialism, because I think that's kind of what the question was saying, that maybe East Africa is being taken by China, Southern Africa maybe by Russia. No, I do not think that, but I think Africans are way more open now to negotiate openly with partners that serve them best and for whom they can collaborate with best. And it will not always be the same partner every time. But it's not the same situation at all as colonialism, where we did not have a say in terms of collaboration, because that was not collaboration, that was colonialism. I think I'll stop there.
So much, Anele. And the last point that you made about Africa having much more agency today than before and being able to choose its own partners is really important. Kwame, please go ahead.
All right, let me start from where you ended. Yes, it's true. It's not, I think Africa has always had, right up to the end of the Cold War, different people played different roles, some of it good, some of it bad. So I think that continues. Okay, so the point is that Africa's always had African countries have always had partners of different kinds, and these partners have played different roles, some of it good, some of it bad, and I think that continues. Even within East Africa, which I'm most familiar with, there's no single person who has a hold, or single country that has a hold on everybody else, and so it's a mixture, and countries apply themselves and partner with one person or the other, depending on what their goals are at the global level or at the regional level. And some of those, yes, any country that has an agency will do some things that are harmful, even to its own interest and some. So yes, these political things are all there, and we have a variety of all kinds of partners that are playing around here for good and bad. So that's one. I think Abhishek's question about a global rating agency. Yes, so the AU's argument is that the argument that I've seen, and it's part of what international financial architecture reform pushes, is that African countries, especially those who seek rating in order to access commercial loans, have usually had people who conduct ratings that are not sensitive to African specific conditions. For that reason, some of those ratings mean that African countries pay a premium for borrowing in global markets. And there's a sense in which that is true. The reason I support the creation of a different one is not for identity questions, that we need one that comes from Africa. The reason I do that is because of to get a diversity in ratings so that there's competition among the rating agencies. So that's an economic argument, not a political argument, which is what I hear, and sometimes what the AU itself has pushed. I think that would be wrong. There is no certainty, however, that if you have a rating agency that sits on the African continent, that its rating approach would be the one that everybody would use, but it would be a good one because it would be available to counter-check with the other ratings agencies, all of which do not necessarily sit on the African continent. Many of them are based in the US, for instance. So for the purposes of introducing more competition to that structure of only 4 firms based outside, maybe that's a good thing by itself. But I don't support an African ratings agency for identity questions. I think the most important thing is it needs to get the confidence of global lenders that it actually assesses right what the risks are, especially the political risks for the purposes of rating a country's debt. So for that reason, I think this is a good question. Now, my final one is about on global climate change. Again, on global climate change, African countries have different views. So for instance, the African countries have enormous resources on hydrocarbons. So I'll give an example. I don't speak for it, but I'll give an example of Mozambique. The income per capita in Mozambique is about $1,000 per person per year. They have just recently, in the last 10 years, discovered enormous natural gas reserves. So I understand if they are nervous about any claim that, look, they should keep their natural gas reserves unexploited because of global warming, especially because they have not. They have a big development catch-up to do, and they are not responsible for the global warming that has taken place. So I think India and African countries could come together, if it must, or African countries could come together and argue for a just transition. So the just transition argument is one that they would make. But selling the argument that keeping global carbon, hydrocarbons trade outside and to limit it, as some people are arguing in other parts of the world, would be difficult to sell to African countries that are endowed with resources related to petroleum, because they definitely need them. And without that, their development path would be actually more difficult than him. So if the argument is to actually ask for the differences and for a transition mechanism that is just, that recognizes people's contribution to the existing stock of global warming, global hydrocarbons into the world, carbon pollution, then that's fine. But if the argument is entirely that everybody should stop it and reduce the exploitation of existing reserves, you'll have a difference. And obviously it will be a more difficult political thing to actually persuade many countries. I know Kenya has led in that argument that, look, Kenya's electricity is entirely generated. 90% of Kenya's electricity is now generated from geothermal resources, which does not cause global warming. Does not cause carbon pollution and therefore global warming. So Kenya is in a different path, but that's not a path that other countries on the African continent, which have enormous resources, and that would be a platform for their development, would accept. So yes, that's a complicated thing, and it's one of those things that will actually feature in how African countries take global diplomacy, because some of them will take completely different or more nuanced arguments than what what other countries would do, because Africa is different in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kwame. Modesta, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think there was a question on how India and Africa could collaborate on issues or around cybersecurity, or how they could collaborate to tackle cybersecurity issues. The first point I raise is on policy and regulation alignment. And so the two regions could work towards harmonizing their cybersecurity policies and regulations to create a more coherent and unified approach across both regions. And we could also look at data protection laws across both regions. So they could also collaborate on the development and enforcement of data protection laws that actually safeguard personal and sensitive data, especially in their bilateral agreements among state parties. We could also look at the issue I raised earlier on capacity building and training. where India and African countries could come together and organize joint training programs, workshops, and seminars that enhance cybersecurity skills and the knowledge of professionals in both regions. We could also have scholarships and exchange programs for students and professionals to study and train in the cybersecurity field across both regions. And then we could also establish bilateral and multilateral frameworks that tackle issues of cybersecurity. So this way, the regions or state parties could sign bilateral and multilateral cybersecurity agreements to facilitate cooperation, information sharing, particularly joint action against cybersecurity threats. We could have information sharing and intelligence cooperation, where we develop mechanisms for sharing threat intelligence between, let's say, India and Africa's cybersecurity agencies to stay ahead of emerging threats. We know most individuals engaged in these cyber attacks are very tech savvy. And so such initiatives could actually go a long way in addressing the challenges and then actually improving the regulatory agencies and their ability to actually address challenges as they arise. I think there was also a question on plans between India and Africa to enhance cultural studies. So on that, I think I have noted down a number of initiatives that actually already exist. And one of it, I think a number of it has actually even been spoken of already. We have the Indian Council for Cultural Relation Initiative. There's the India-Africa Forum Summit, and then the Pan-African e-network. So the Pan-African e-network leverages technology to connect educational institutions in Africa with those in India to facilitate the sharing of educational and cultural content. If you take the Indian Council for Cultural Relation Initiatives, it has been at least instrumental in promoting cultural ties through scholarship, cultural exchange programs, and the establishment of Indian cultural centers in a number of African countries. So I think some of these initiatives exist. The impact, I will not be able to speak on it, but if I don't know who asked the question, the person can check or research around some of these institutions, and then I'm sure he can be a beneficiary or tap into the available resources. Thank you.
Yes, does Samir please respond to the questions that were directed to you?
So I'll compliment a little bit on what Kwame said on this climate change. So most of the initiative, apart from this multilateral forums, what we can do, there are certain initiatives that India has already started. For example, International Solar Alliance, ISA, maybe all of you are aware of it. Most of the African countries, they are member of it, and through solar energy, the operation has started in Africa. Then there is also Climate and Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI. This also, India is building a lot of climate and disaster resilient infrastructure in many countries. Then we have ICRIER, which is a government organization, and it is giving climate smart agriculture training to many countries. It's small scale, but it is doing, and it is not from very new. It's quite old, like more than 2-3 decades they are doing it. And organizations, private organizations like Tata and Mahindra, many other organizations, they're also working in agriculture, climate smart agriculture in many African countries. Then there is organization like Barefoot, which actually brings African women and train them on solar, how to assemble solar panels and etc. And then they go back and then they work in their own countries. So in that way, although small scale, but we are into climate partnership at the ground level. Kwame has already told what we can do in the multilateral level. I would also want to touch upon the question on this geopolitical influence. Yes, you are right. So whenever we're talking about Africa, I mean, the China question came, His Excellency will answer the question later. But yes, whenever we're talking about Africa, the China is the dragon in the room. So they are the most biggest, largest partner for most of the African countries, trading partner. But if you look at US during the Trump's time, they lost a little bit with Trump's comments, some comments on Africa, but then I think US has also taken back the grip, and they are again with this Forum for Democracy. They have during this G20, they introduced many. It is more like it is less like a scramble for Africa. It is more like these countries are actually trying to quote Africa for their own need. And then even if you think that France is to some extent losing its influence, it's really in some countries, yes, but France has very good presence in many other countries, like in Benin, for example. So France will remain. So Russia is a new entry. Russia is actually not new entry. It was Soviet Union, which was very much present. And even today, if you look at Russia's engagement, most of the countries that Russia is engaging, they all had a very good relationship with Soviet Union, Soviet era time. So be it Zimbabwe or other countries. But yes, Russia's main interest, to some extent, it is very less to do with the consumer goods or trade. It is more with the security partnerships or resource trade, if I can say. But then there are a lot of emerging countries also, like Turkey. Japan was present. So in a way, yes, it is a lot of countries are actually competing. And I think how Africa is going to handle it, one clue can be actually South Asia. Many South Asian countries, what they do is they, for economy, they have a good partnership with China. But for security, they are partnering with USA. So in that way, probably Africa will also have Africa, or rather African countries. Every African country is based on their interests. They will have, as I said earlier, it's a multiplex. So they can choose whichever movie they want to watch. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Samir, and thank you for your example from of multiplex and movies. So I would like to turn to you, sir. Would you like to respond to the questions which were directed at you?
Very good, thank you. I think that's very interesting, Sami, that Africa, we have our own interests. We can watch any movies that we want to, without any restriction, for that matter. You are right. The issue of, for example, let me start with China. What do you call checkbook diplomacy? I mean, this is I would say the West characterization of China's relationship with the global, South, the partners in the global South. And I mean, whatever name they call it, Africa is, just like he said, we pursue our interest. China and Africa, has a special interest, just like India and Africa, we have a very special interest. Africa pursues what is good for Africa. And African countries also pursue, our own interest. If you look at the relationship between China and Africa, most of the, this relationship is based on infrastructural development. And it's unprecedented. If you go to, a lot of African countries, you see roads and bridges being built, ports being built by China. Do we ignore that? Do we, forgo that for other developments? We've been having, relationships with IMF and World Bank. And if you go to Gambia, there is not a single road that is built by IMF or World Bank. You understand. So, I mean, China built bridges in Gambia in the last 7 years. So do you want us to, forgo that? Why would we do that? Development goes with road infrastructure development. And now if China leaves, the roads still, are in the Gambia. So we cannot forgo, our interests, for, whatever names, other people call our relationship with China and other countries. For example, India-Africa relationship is also based on mutual interest and mutual respect. India, sits down with African countries and find out what do you need? How can we work towards achieving this objective? And this has been our relationship. They have never imposed any of their conditions on us. So they respect us, and we want the same thing from other, relationships, bilateral or multilateral or trilateral or whatever you call it. We want the same, respect, given to our continent. We are free. We should be free to deal with any other country we want to deal with. For example, when the issue came, questioning India, why their relationship with Russia, buying crude oil from Russia. What did the foreign minister say? It is our interest. We are pursuing our interests. And he is right. You cannot put a condition on us not to do trade with a particular country when you are, yourself, you are dealing indirectly with that country. It's an irony. And as in Africa also, we would not be conditioned not to trade with any other country. We would be at liberty to trade with any other country we want to trade with. At the same time, we will respect every other country. Our relationship with India, we cherish it based on mutual respect, understanding, and interest. And India, we are glad, is giving us that. That's why in my first address, I mentioned that India and Africa, we are connected at the waist. It's a one body. We are connected. And this is true. So similarly, in the United States, UN, he mentioned about the power, veto power. For example, if other countries agree to allow India into the Security Council, and China having the power of veto, China vetoes it, what should we do? Well, this is why it is important for Africa and India to work together to achieve this common objective, our shared interest. Through AU, Africa and India can forge an agreement that the two of us should be admitted at the Security Council at the same time. What's it called? No, the AU would represent. You cannot represent one country and leave the others. AU would have a seat, just like in G20. If we want to, for example, invite South Africa to UN or Nigeria to UN, that could create another obstacle, because, for example, Nigeria is in West Africa. South Africa is in South Africa. You understand? We would still need representation in Africa, in the maybe northern part of Africa. You understand? But we can have AU to represent Africa as a bloc. And I think that would be the right thing to do. So equally, India also should be represented. So what we do in that case, India, if AU is to represent without India, AU can say, well, no, we would have to go with India, because AU can use its influence with China to make sure that China does not veto India's membership into the Security Council. This can be agreement, understanding between India and AU. And I think during this India-Africa economic forum summit, this should be an agenda, some form of a framework agreement between Africa and India, that our membership to the UN Security Council is a common interest, and we cannot allow one to be a member without the other. So that representative and the frame of agreement It's left to them to decide. But this is my view about that. And the cultural interaction. Modesta rightly said, I think the India Council for Cultural Relations is a right, avenue for this cultural interaction. There is another one that is the ITEC program, India Technical Economic Cooperation with African countries and other countries in the global south. I think that's also another avenue for that interaction, because currently we have thousands of African students in India that are studying here, free of charge, by the way. I think that's enough cultural relationship between our two, continents, because India is a subcontinent. So we cherish that relationship. And there's a lot happening in terms of capacity building, trainings. Gambia, as small as we are, this year alone, we have about 80 Gambians who have come here for capacity building training. These are senior government officers, foreign services officers, and senior military personnel that are coming here for training. So the opportunities are unlimited. All of us have to exploit these opportunities. There's a lot to do, but the relationship is progressing and is good for all of us. And this platform, ORF, giving us this platform the opportunity to engage. They are sitting in different parts of Africa, and we are communicating, deciding what is good for all of us. I think that's an opportunity, and it's cultural interaction at this moment. We should pursue this more often so that that cultural interaction and the relationship can continue and progress for the betterment of our two peoples. Thank you.
Everyone, I'm Nidhi Bakshi from the International Solar Alliance. And I thought because Samir just mentioned about International Solar Alliance, I just want to add that access to energy security will play a pivotal role in both the development story of India and Africa. And that is where International Solar Alliance comes into the picture. Just to give a brief, International Solar Alliance is an intergovernmental treaty-based organization based in New Delhi, and it was founded by Honorable Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi.
Ma'am, do you have a question or a specific point?
No, I just want to sensitize everybody on the role access to energy security will play and how ISI is helping its member countries. Excellency, I want to share with you that we've had demonstration projects in Gambia on solar water pumping.
Thanks a lot. We have understood your point about energy and the important role that ISA is playing.
Can I just, quickly?
And also another point is that access to energy security has a multiplier effect on SDGs.
Sure.
So it will form the foundation of the rest of the
think the awareness that you are creating is quite important. In fact, next month, the ISS is having a regional, summit in Ivory Coast. I'll be attending that.
Yes.
We are collaborating with ISA. It is very important, to the global south. And thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful evening, and I would like to thank the speakers who've taken time out from their busy schedule and presented their views, and also people who've joined us here in person. And we've had a nice mix of young people who are studying from universities around in Delhi. And I think the biggest takeaway, I'm not going to try and summarize the entire discussion that happened today, but very briefly, I think we agree and very forcefully agree that Africa needs a much stronger voice in global institutions. We agree that the global financial architecture needs to be reformed to be able to better give access to funds to Africa and take care of global problems like climate change. India and Africa will work closely towards that. We need greater engagement with the African Union. I think that's the biggest takeaway from what Excellency said today. I would thank everybody for participating in this conference. It's been great. Thank you so much.